Remember when the headlines were screaming that there was a 50-50 chance that Russia would use a nuclear weapon? Yeah, that was never true. Let's talk about what really happened. You see, one of the recurring themes in the Russian invasion of Ukraine is the Kremlin's attempt to use nuclear weapons to deter the West from taking certain actions. There appear to be two vocal schools of thought regarding this. One seems to think that Russia is completely incapable of actual nuclear coercion. Instead, when Russia succeeds here, it is because the West deters itself by listening to empty threats. The second wants to buckle in response to even the slightest atomic intimation, as though no risk is worth the potential reward. However, the reality of nuclear strategy ought to fall somewhere in the middle. The risk of nuclear war, or accidental nuclear war, does mandate some forethought, but the effectiveness of nuclear coercion is limited. And that gives some guidance on when the United States ought to call Russia's nuclear bluffs. In fact, it speaks directly to a dramatic situation from earlier in the war. You know, the one I mentioned a minute ago about a nuclear coin flip? But like I said, it was just never true. Let's jump back in time to the fall of 2022. To set the scene, the front line looked roughly like this. A few months earlier, Ukraine had won the Battle of Kyiv. The question then turned to whether Ukrainian troops could replicate that success in the east. The answer was yes. Ukraine put pressure on two fronts, the Kharkiv region to the north and Kherson city toward the south. The latter situation provided an opportunity. Kherson sat beyond the Dnipro River. Thus, to adequately protect it from an assault, Russia needed to preemptively deploy troops and materiel to the city. And putting all of those things beyond the river meant that Russia could not quickly redeploy them in the event of an offensive elsewhere. Well, Russia did not want to lose a foothold in Kherson, so reinforcements did indeed go in that direction. In turn, that allowed Ukraine to break free in the north, leading to a substantial shift in the front line. The Kremlin responded by mobilizing hundreds of thousands of soldiers, the amount necessary to provide sufficient coverage along the massive line of control. Putin's speech announcing the mobilization came with a warning. If the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will without doubt use all available means to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff. We will return to the irony behind that statement in a moment. A few days later, though, Putin signed legislation declaring Ukraine's four easternmost oblasts, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, to officially be parts of the Russian Federation by Federation law. It also came at a time when U.S. intelligence indicated that there was an enhanced risk of a Russian nuclear strike, as the battle was about to turn toward Kherson. That is where this headline from before came about. It turns out, though, that I was omitting an important part of the story here. You see, that headline came from TASS, a Russian state-owned news company, and knowledge of that ownership may have raised some red flags. Actually, that is a major problem today with the proliferation of news outlets. There are so many out there that you may not exactly know who is writing what you are reading. That is where today's sponsor, Ground News, comes into play. As you browse through the headlines, you not only see the name of the outlet, but also its factual accuracy, political leaning, and ownership connections. You can also examine the distribution of the story across the political spectrum. What's more, you can track your own reading habits and see whether your own consumption slants in a particular direction. And by going to ground.news/linesonmaps or scanning the QR code on your screen, you can take 40% off a Vantage plan, which grants you access to all of this and more. So thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring today's video, and also the following sub-video. Yep, that's right. With my apologies, we need to enter a video within a video. The title is The Russian Nuclear Threat That Never Was. And hey, look, I even made a thumbnail for it. Russian news agencies aside, did you also have a recollection that there was a 50-50 chance that Russia would use nuclear weapons before I even started this video? If so, good, because now I have you ensnared. I am not here to judge, though, because that was my takeaway impression too before I started looking into it. If you avoided this altogether, also good, because, again, it never happened. The idea appeared in headlines beyond the TASS article, and also in the bodies of plenty of more news pieces. The story itself traces to Bob Woodward's book, War. That is it, by the way. No subtitle, just War. I suppose you are allowed to have a 3-letter book title when your career highlights include taking down a president of the United States. Anyway, let's read what the Watergate Unraveler actually said. Putin had about 30,000 troops stationed in Kherson. American intelligence agencies assessed that if Russian troops were encircled by Ukrainian forces in Kherson, there was a 50% chance Putin would order the use of tactical nuclear weapons to avoid such a catastrophic battlefield loss. Compare that to the headline of a flat 50% chance. That would correspond to a claim that looks like this, but that ignores the conditional part of the claim. It is an if-then statement. The then part is only true if the if part is true. Thus, the 50% thing only held given a battlefield position that looked like this, and the belief that the Dnipro River was an impenetrable wall, neither of which was remotely what the situation looked like at the time. By analogy, and this is true, I estimate that there is a 99% chance that the United States would launch nuclear weapons on Moscow if Russia launched nuclear weapons at Washington. Now, I ask you, should I write a headline that says, there is a 99% chance Moscow is nuked this year? No, because for that to be true, this would have had to have happened to Washington first. So I guess you should probably pre-write that story, because you would have about a 15-minute window where it would be relevant. Regardless, following the analogy, you should not write this headline either. Meanwhile, if you enjoyed this sub-video, then you are going to love the rest of the main video because we are not done there. So let's get back to that one. After all, there remains that whole thing about how we will without doubt use all available means to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff. Yeah, usually when you hear, this is not a bluff, you are looking at a situation prime for a bluff. It might not be a bluff, but there is cause for skepticism. And, indeed, Putin's threat falls under the standard critique to not listen to what leaders say. Now, I repeat that mantra so often because it is a useful heuristic for what you will read in the news. Most of that falls under categories where the axiom holds. However, we should still be aware of the limits of the rule of thumb, because words are how the United States informed Russia that it was not going to buy into the threat. You see, contrary to the axiom, when diplomats sit in a room to negotiate over various issues, most of what they do is simply saying things, and yet oftentimes progress is made there. The reason is the same as why you may find watching this video helpful. I am not just spouting malarkey for durations between 10 and 90 minutes, even if some folks in the comments indicate otherwise. No, I am making persuasive arguments. You do not have to take me at my word. Rather, you follow my logic and verify as we go that what I am saying makes sense. This kind of learning can take place in more contentious settings too. The discovery process in legal proceedings is designed to get both parties to reveal their general argument for why each will win the case, and test the reasonableness of their perspectives. That helps resolve the need for further litigation, and despite what you see on television, most cases end at this step. Well, a similar thing happens in interstate coercion, with the nuclear showdown being a prime example of it. Putin's threat and the intelligence report set off a minor panic within the White House, with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan among the most concerned. Around this time, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin had a conversation with his Russian counterpart Sergei Shoigu regarding the slippery slope of nuclear weapons use. However, what I want to focus on today is a separate phone call detailed in the Woodward book between Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley and his Russian counterpart, General Valery Gerasimov. No, this was not to have a debate about whether one should smile for official photos. Rather, it was regarding the earlier nuclear threats. Milley began by asking for clarification regarding Russian doctrine on the use of nuclear weapons. Gerasimov responded by telling Milley that Milley already knew the answer to that, because Russia's manuals on the subject are public. He was not lying. You too can pull up Russia's doctrine if you want to. Milley indeed knew full well what the doctrine was. However, for effect, he said that he did not have the Russian manuals on hand, and requested that Gerasimov refresh his memory. Gerasimov obliged. 1. If there is an attack on Russia that threatens the stability of the regime. 2. A foreign power attacks Russia with a weapon of mass destruction. And 3. In the event of a catastrophic battlefield loss. Milley thought that explanation was good to hear, because according to U.S. analysis, Russia was not going to be suffering a catastrophic loss like losing its entire army. Gerasimov agreed, and the phone call ended. Basically, Milley was telling Gerasimov that if Russia was going to make nuclear threats, then it had better have a good argument about why it is politically and militarily a good idea. Gerasimov could not articulate that, and so there was no real nuclear threat. The United States could move on from the worry that Russia would use a tactical nuclear weapon in this particular incident. As for how exactly the intelligence estimate for Kherson came about, the astonishingly high estimated risk of nuclear use remains a puzzle. It would be easy to dismiss it as some sort of rogue report that did not match other intelligence estimates. But no, it appears to be the full-on working belief of the US government at the time. Another tempting conclusion to draw is that the CIA was getting its information from terrible sources. But again, that seems incorrect. The United States had infiltrated the Kremlin and had some type of source on the inside. That is part of the reason why the United States was so sure that Russia was going to invade at the beginning of the year. It also ironically contributed to the expectation that Russia would quickly win, because the Kremlin thought that Russia would quickly win, and that corroborated the observable mismatch between the two countries on the ground. Well, using nuclear weapons in Kherson was a question of Russian intentions, not a matter of Russian abilities. The earlier miscalculation was regarding abilities, so a repeat of that miscalculation was not something to worry about here. However, the conspiratorial nature of counterintelligence would suggest that Russia may have been playing a game in this particular case. The Kremlin could have concluded that a leak was present based on what happened at the start of the invasion. It is therefore possible that the 50-50 discussion was fabricated by a select few Kremlin officials, and then circulated within the palatial halls, so that the United States would hear about it and believe it. Regardless, the whole plan lacked a logical coherence, which was what Milley's phone call intended to demonstrate. Sure, I could see a world where Russia really was facing this sort of situation, and then decided that the risks of nuclear escalation were worth trying to save 30,000 soldiers. But actually doing it would have put Russia in danger of losing Beijing's support. Win the battle, maybe, but then lose the war. Of course, our skepticism over this particular incident does not mean that the United States could completely ignore concerns about nuclear escalation in other domains. Even aside from Gerasimov's articulation of the three circumstances that Russia may use nuclear weapons, according to official doctrine, there is always the possibility that heightened tensions lead to a world-ending accident. But that was just not the case here. Indeed, as for Kherson itself, Ukraine never put Russia in a position where the latter risks suffering a catastrophic loss. Ukraine indeed forced a Russian retreat, allowing the blue and yellow flag to fly in the watermelon capital once again. However, an actual fight over the city never took place. Thus, Russia was never at risk of losing 30,000 soldiers, whether you want to call that potentially catastrophic or not. Rather, Ukraine left open this golden bridge to retreat from, hoping that giving Russia an off-ramp would save Kherson from destruction. Russia indeed took it, but would blow the bridge on its way out to prevent Ukraine from pursuing. Either way, the plan worked, and Ukraine completed its most successful phase of the war. Now, I know that this saga took place 2.5 years ago. What's more, we have a completely different administration in office today. Heck, the tempo of the war is completely different too. But it is still important that we understand what really happened back then. You will frequently hear it cited as a reason why the United States should be cautious about taking certain actions to help Ukraine. And, to reinforce an earlier point, Washington cannot completely ignore Russia's nuclear arsenal in this regard. It is just that citing this particular incident as evidence of a greater need for caution is not as compelling as some headlines might lead you to believe. Thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring today's video, and the sub-video for that matter. Head over to ground.news/linesonmaps or scan the QR code to take 40% off their Vantage plan. And if you enjoyed today's video or sub-video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.